I hope you're doing marvelously well. I'm sitting here with Irko. How are you, my friend?
How you doing? Warren, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming down. Well, actually, I came to you. We're at SAE in Hollywood.
Correct.
Tell me a little bit about your journey, because you, like myself, are not from this country.
I am not. Well, let's start in the very beginning. My family actually sent me to the UK when I was 11 to learn English.
Wow.
You can probably tell I still have a British accent, very distinctive.
It's a very distinctive British accent. Yes.
No, I don't know at all. But no, that's what happened. So, they were definitely very open to the idea of me, growing and being able to acquire a skill that, when you live in Italy, you don't speak English at all.
Where in England?
It was right outside of London. It was one of those summer, it was like a college that in the summer wouldn't have students there. But it was one of those things that was basically all around learning English for people from other countries. So there was like Greek people, German people, and
oh, fantastic.
Kids. It was like young kids. It was awesome, and I had a blast.
Oh, fantastic. So you learn English that way?
So yeah, that was the beginning. Of course, at school, you learn English and everything, but that's more like a grammar, like a book knowledge kind of English. It's not a like real communication thing. And then after those years, I somehow got into hip hop big time. And I mean, big time. Like I was like super, super into hip hop. So much so that I kind of created that, that scene around me, because in Italy, clearly there was the music scene is not big, number one. And even more, hip hop wasn't even a thing in Italy. So, I started to hang out with older guys that were into breakdancing and, DJing the scratching thing and all of that stuff. Got bigger and bigger, and I always felt, like that was my thing for whatever reason. Also, while traveling with my family all over the world, I would always see that kind of music, the American music, and especially hip hop, for shows and stuff like that. Like in Germany, they were a lot more Americanized than Italy was back in the day. So I got to see Run DMC perform in Munich when I was there, for example. And all of those things, it seemed like a very worldly kind of thing, rather than Italy, where there's, it's kind of like a little, province kind of scene. I'm sure you feel kind of the same way, going from the UK to here. And then I started, producing records with my computer and, DJing, first with CDs, then with turntables, because I wanted to get a real feel for it. I've never been really like a scratch DJ or anything like that. It was always about, doing parties or, making the girls dance and stuff like that. It was always, for me, that's what it was. And then, opened the first studio, opened the second studio, and blah, blah, blah. And, 20 years later, I'm here with Warren.
So tell me, how did you end up in America?
Well, I always wanted to be here and do big records. As I started with doing small things back home, I did, for maybe 5 or 6 years, I basically worked with nothing but Americans that were stationed in a nearby Air Force base. And at any given time, there was maybe like 20,000 Americans there stationed, and that included families as well. So a lot of kids and a lot of people that were just bored. And, after going to all the major cities in Italy, after military guys there for 5 years, it's like, okay, I've seen it all, So for them to be able to come to my little studio and do sessions was amazing. Now, granted, this was in my dad's garage, so it was like the whole place was half the size of this room, In fact, I got a picture for it. Hold on, let me show you. It wasn't really that big of a deal at all. That was the control room.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Studio Beat 1.
Yes, that was actually called only Studio Beat at the time, and the reason for that was because I made beats in there. Didn't know there was going to be a 2 and maybe a 3 as well. Didn't know, and so that's what I did basically. A lot of records with these guys from the base, and that really allowed me to have my English to be perfected. And now I actually know how to speak the technical in terms of gain staging, faders, those kind of that kind of terminology. But then also the artist English,
So you didn't go to any kind of schooling or anything for it?
I did go to audio engineering school. That was right before I opened the studio. So this is 4 or 5 years prior to this picture. And yes, it was.
And that was in Italy?
That was in Italy. In fact, the audio engineering school for me really, really dictated what happened later down the line in my career. So, if I can suggest a a guy that wants to get into the music career, especially in the engineering, is always to go to school. Not because that's going to be the end of your training and basically you get out of school and you know how to do records. You don't. But it's definitely a very big platform that can support your career.
And so you meet American kids.
Yes.
So you're getting American kids, they're getting the latest and greatest. So you're probably hearing music from America in those days, 2002, probably a lot quicker than most Italians were.
Yeah, for sure. And not only that, also everything else, groceries,
Sure. Just the culture.
clothes, everything. I kind of knew that, if I wanted to do bigger things, which I did, I always do, still do to this day, I needed to be where, I could sell.
Where everything was happening.
Yeah. The reason why I was saying that school really was beneficial for me was because I had interned for one of my teachers at the audio engineering school, right? And years later, he actually opened a way bigger studio, and in it, there were 3 control rooms that he wanted to have for rentals, like long-term rentals. And that's what this is. He basically rented me one of these rooms, and I was finally able to move all my equipment out of my dad's basement into a proper place where I could do my, run my business in a more effective way, and also not to mention have very big live rooms and everything, which basically eliminated the constraints that I had in a basement of my dad's house. But anyway, so once I had finished building the place, I was like, okay, now I need to see really how I can improve my entire model, my entire business. So I picked up and went to New York City. Now, at the time, I had put all of my money, and when I say all of my money, I mean every last, I guess, euro. I was gonna say dollar, but every last euro that I had into that, so I had no money. So I found the cheapest flight that I could get from Zurich to New York. It was 350 euros, which now it would have been like, maybe $400 round trip. And I was like, oh, that's fantastic. I had no money. I had to make it happen, And so I did. Come to find out when I got to the airport over there that the reason why it was so cheap was that I had to spend the night at the airport.
Oh, you did?
So I totally did like that movie where Tom Hanks is living in the airport. That was me. So I get to New York knowing 2 people, literally 2 people. And my goal was to go and explore the big recording studios in New York City and see how they were built, ran especially, and how the organization of the entire facility was, or something that I could bring back home to Italy. And a lot of things happened in that trip. And I got home with a lot of knowledge and also a double platinum award for working with Jay-Z.
Nice.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was pretty amazing. So yeah, this was 10 years ago.
So you arrived, and how did you get to get the assistant gig?
So 2 things. The first thing is when I got to America, and actually not just that one trip, but even later, I was like, had already been working in Italy for 10 plus years. There's 2 ways that I can approach this. Either I just forget about all of that and I just start from the ground up in recording studios and be, an assistant, do coffees, whatever, and then work my way up. Or I just do my thing. And, of course, doing the studio route would have been a lot of a longer process, but it would have been quote unquote easier. A lot of quotes around the easy part. But
sure.
But then I was like, nah, I don't think that's what I need. So I never did it. So even though I had worked in places for limited amount of time, I never thought that I should go the assistant route and all of that. Actually, I have 2 other things. It just so happened that when you get to New York and you know 2 people in an entire city of 9 million inhabitants or whatever, I talked to everybody. I'm like my biggest PR, because I'm telling everybody what I do, and word got around, and it turns out that a friend of my cousin was dating somebody that worked at Sony recording studios. I was like, what? So I was like, please make the tour happen for me. So I got to go to Sony recording studios, which was, and probably still is to this day, even though it's no longer there. It's probably the biggest place I've ever seen in my life. So I got the scale of things, because I always tell, especially the guys in Italy or everywhere else in America, really, we all know, all music people know about the size of recording studios and how the big business is being ran over here and everything. We all are aware of it, but knowing and living it in real life is a very, very different thing. So once you step into a physical place where all these big records are made, and I remember when I was there, DMX was in one room, Destiny's Child was in the other one, Noriega was in another. Like, it was like, what? Like these are the people that I listen to. They're amazing. So that was like a life-changing thing. It became a thing that I was aware of. into a thing in my reality, in my life, you know. Granted, I wasn't there working every day, but at least I got to see it, be there, breathe the same air. You know, it was,
That's fantastic.
I was fresh off the boat, you know. This was like, so that was the second thing. Third thing is, as I said, I had been working for years before coming to America, right? And one of the things that I was very, very involved in was the whole MySpace hustle at the time, you know? So I was connecting with all kinds of people on MySpace. And I was really hardcore on my, you know, talking to people, especially people that I felt like they had great music or, you know, they were doing things. And one of these guys happened to be an amazing producer who had mixed a bunch of records. At the time, he was in Japan. His name is B Money. Shout out to him because he gave me a big break, of course. And I had done a lot of records with him until he got tired of Japan, moved back to New York City. And next thing you know, I'm doing a record with him, and it's for Jay-Z. That's how it happened. Even though it was kind of like, you know, yeah, I'm lucky to be in New York and at the right time, in the right place. But it wasn't like an overnight or like, oh, it just so happened. And also, it wasn't one of those things where I was just, you know, like say interning for a studio and I just happened to be on the credit. Like it has always been by myself. Never had management. Never had anything. You know, it was just me. So that's how it happened. And then of course, having a stamp of approval of a project of that magnitude was a big thing. So shortly after that, I got to do a lot of other things with big names. A snowball. You know, I don't need to tell you. You know exactly how it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's still every day you have to wake up and sort of almost reinvent yourself every day.
Absolutely.
And try and be current, you know.
I had a tough time when it was time for me to move from the console mixes to the Pro Tools thing. When I first started working in audio, Pro Tools plugins and everything, it was a little kind of like a gimmicky kind of thing. You could clearly tell it was not the console thing. You know, nowadays, of course, it's so completely different. But at first, I felt a little disoriented. So yeah, so the reinvent yourself thing always happens constantly. I still learn every day. I watch YouTube channels like Produce Like Pro. No, I really do. I really do. It's very important to be current and know what's happening.
Well, I learned so much from doing these interviews.
Yeah, yeah. And it's, you know, it's all about communication. So I believe that, you know, teaching is exactly that. You know, of course, the other very important part of teaching is that who's teaching needs to be as interested in teaching like who's being taught. So, you know, that information can pass.
I agree. You have to love and be passionate about music. If you're not, then you set yourself up as some kind of all-knowing expert, which as I always say, I'm not an expert.
Right.
I'm still trying to figure it out. And I enjoy the figuring it out process. Well, I love what is that phrase? It's a journey, not a destination.
Love it. Yeah. Similar to that, I often say to those that ask me or they're around me, they were trying to get on, and I always tell them it's the direction, not the speed. Ultimately, you'll get there, but it's important the direction rather than the speed.
Let us segue into listen to some music. I'd like to just probably ask you about every song.
Let's do it. All right, so this first one is an R&B song.
Yep.
I want to play it because this is kind of like my bow tie kind of music. This is very, very elegant. I love this. So yeah, let's do it.
With good love, baby. Let me fill your heart with good times. Make memories in the name of love. Oh yeah. Said all these things good love can bring. I keep my promise to you. You keep your promise to me. Devoted to your girls, and my heart will never change. So I need you to show me that you love me just the same. I will know your love. Baby, I need it. Oh yeah. Baby, I need it. Girl, I want your love. And all your kisses. Baby, I need it. Baby, I need it. Girl, I want your love, baby. I found you, love you.
Cool, I have a few questions.
Yeah.
So, first thing that strikes me is it's a very beautiful jazzy kind of mix, and as soon as that sort of, is it a kick, is it a low tune tom kind of hip hop thing comes in, it's interesting. It sounds like obviously a sample, so it's what kind of keeps it modern. And then I hear like it's very low, but there's that little sawtooth synth that comes in, which also just takes it over. It's a little bit more hip hop. Do they provide you with a rough mix that sort of illustrated this idea, or when you listen to a song like this, you go, "Oh, okay, I hear the jazz guitars, I hear these beautiful harmonies coming out, I can hear the jazz influence." But then you've got these 2 or 3 elements of obviously hip hop that come in. What's your thought process?
Right. I always ask my clients for the rough mix, always.
Okay.
That's actually the file that I spend the most time on before the actual session because I study it. I want to hear it. I come up with a game plan with positioning, leveling, what to favor, what not to favor, all of these things. So yes, rough mix all the time. Most of the times the rough mixes are, super distorted. They're like uber loud. So actually my mix is lower than the rough mix. But that's if we want to make it pretty, then that's the way to do it. The general direction, this artist I was very, very aware of because when I was back in the day of DJing, I would play Drew Hill's music. And so when I got to work with Jazz, who's the singer, one of the singers of the band, I was like, wow, that was one of those moments where I was like, wow, I grew up listening to these records and now I'm called in to mix for you. Whoa, I was impressed. So I was very, very aware of their sound in terms of the group. So I knew what I was gonna get. When I listened to the composition, very elegant, of course, a lot of sweet guitars, but the drums are still knocking. It's still like the boom and the bap, it's still kind of there. The major thing that I worked on this is that bass, that synth bass that you were talking about is very, very deep in the frequency. So, it's maybe 70, 80 or down, and sometimes even 40, it gets to the sub frequencies. So one major change that I've done on this one particularly is that I moved the kick way up. So the kick is really like super punchy up in the upper frequency. I don't know exactly what, but it's probably like around 100 or something, or maybe 150. And then the bass is happening lower than that. So that's, one of the oldest tricks, of course, for drums and bass. But I felt like it needed it. And also in that way, I created a lot of space for all the sweet music things.
So now with the low end, one of the biggest things I get when people send me mixes and stuff, because I have an academy, so people send me things and I mix critique them.
Nice.
And one of the biggest things is the low end. Now,
always.
Yeah, always. And it is really kind of what sorts out the men from the boys. For me, I was mixing, my own stuff. And when we had budgets and stuff, of course, we'd have external mixers. And I remember at a point in the early 2000s, I did a mix and then I sent it to Tim Palmer to mix. It was obviously amazing. And he mixes it and comes back. And I'm like, it sounds exactly like my mix, except his low end is amazing. So then I started asking lots of questions and learned a lot of information. Now, the one that strikes me, and I think is a big one for a lot of people listening to this, is how do you keep your low end bass consistent? Because if you don't have it consistent, it's just going to come in and out of your speakers. You're going to be in different environments. It's going to be boomy sometimes and then disappear others. What are you doing on your low end on, say, that sub kind of keyboard sound?
So if it's a sub synth or an 808 or whatever, as long as it's in the same range, I want to make sure that the level of the actual signal is pretty much consistent. However, the minute, say like the bass note is around 70 or 80 hertz or something like that, the minute it gets to the 200 range, like an octave higher, of course it can't be as loud as how it's lower, in the lower frequency, in the lower range. So I want to make sure that, I occupy the same space for the bass so that it doesn't get in the way of everything else, namely the kick. Really, that's really what it is. And also I try to isolate both of them, bass and kick, so that they're not in the way of one another. So if the kick is at the lower end, then it's steady and it's that frequency all the time, that amplitude, and I put the bass up higher. If not, I'll do it the other way around. But you're right, the problem with having the bass be in the lower part is it depends on what note is being hit. So sometimes, the fundamental might be at 40 hertz, that's like super low. But if it hits, 80 or whatever, it's like way higher. So it moves around. And this one particularly, the bass does move around. Whenever it doesn't hit that range, the sub-frequency range, I just let it go, as long as it works. Yeah. But in other, it really depends, it really depends on the content. Like I see other songs on that we're gonna play next that do stay the same frequency because it's an 808 that's steady, the same frequency.
Before we move on, what I admire about that mix and what I think is the number one, I have a one flying up, the number one differentiator is I hear a lot of crossover stuff. And what I mean, whether it be like jazz with hip hop or rock bands introducing hip hop elements, as soon as you put hip hop or urban elements into songs, it's like getting it so it feels like they actually glue together.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, 99% of the time, when I hear those blends, they're not really a blend. It almost feels like a track and we put a kick and snare on it.
Yes. Yeah.
We put an 808 on it and a kind of snare or a hand clap, which is kind of cool.
Right.
To have that juxtaposition, that angular kind of like two worlds colliding.
Right.
But most of the time it doesn't. It just feels clumsy and almost contrived.
Right.
So I like that. It was interesting. The reason why I called it like the kick tom is because I could tell you shelved it a little higher. So.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah, a lot.
Also, for hip hop, I guess the origin of it is kind of exactly that. It's like getting some other records and flip it into your own, make it into your own. So originally hip hop wasn't really a genre in terms that it grabbed other elements from other genres to make it its own, right? And so that was actually a good thing for me to grow up in a different environment where I had learned how to record a band or whatever. So I could actually remake those same samples that were used. So, that cross connection, I always use it all the time. In fact, the oldest trick of triggering the little white noise on the snare or whatever, that's like a rock thing, and yet I still use it for a lot of other things, a lot of electronic stuff. So, I absolutely love to cross techniques from different genres. That's how I feel I got this gig for the next song that I'm playing you next.
Okay, so what is next?
Kanye, listen to this.
Stay up, 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 yeah, stay up.
It's kinda crazy, right? What she got is so Niagara. Make a young nigga straight need Viagra. Make an old nigga give keys to Jaguar. Just to keep from all the tease and laughter. Her telling her homegirls that he couldn't stay up in the restaurant with her voice way up. Please keep it discreet. Keep the business out of the street. She said I would if he had handled biz up in the streets.
For example, in this one, the kick had basically zero bass. So I was like, I need to do something about that, right? So I triggered that, 40 hertz or whatever sine wave you hear underneath, like it's super, super low. And they loved it. So like,
Great.
Hey, I love it too.
The first thing that strikes me about that song is just how dry and the vocal. I don't know what's the best way. It just sounds like exactly how he recorded it. Like
Yes.
So, natural's a weird word to describe, but it just sounds like he picked up the mic and he's standing next to you.
I actually had two directions when mixing this record, and it was no reverb or no delay on the vocal.
Yeah.
Everything else, do your worst, they told me. So I was like, hey, okay, no problem. That was actually a good thing because I knew the two prohibit zones not to touch, and everything else I could do whatever, right?
But also like compression-wise, I'm sure you use compression, but it doesn't sound, and I hate saying this, compressed, because compression done properly you'd never hear.
Right.
So but I don't hear any compression because a lot of the tools that we use is kind of like the exaggerated, like attack.
Right.
We like that because a little attack on the front of a phrase can make the vocal appear more up front than it really is.
True.
This, I'm sure you use compression, but I don't hear it at all.
1176.
Just an 1176?
Yep, that's it.
A real one or a plugin?
Real one. Yeah.
How many
everything.
tracks do they give you?
It wasn't much at all. Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, you hear it. It's a very basic kind of production. You got that stereo sample with the guitar,
Right.
and then the little shaker, which I believe was in the sample actually, and then kick and snare and the claps and then the vocals. That was really it. It was
Right.
simple. Yeah. That's the one trick. When I do my workshops, kids always ask me, how do I make it big? I'm like, just use 3 sounds. They're gonna be massive, rather than using 30 sounds and they're gonna be all small.
So next up, what do we have?
Yeah, let's listen to this.
That woman so beautiful.
Okay, the number one thing that strikes me on that is the vocal tone. Smooth. It's really, really smooth. Dynamically very controlled. But again, I don't hear any choking on compression or anything. But that's the number one thing I hear whenever I listen to R&B that sounds great, is the vocal just seems to be there the whole time. Not pushed and out front and compressed and bright and aggressive, but just super, super smooth. What were you doing on the vocals there?
This was definitely a mix that I guess could fit in the description of silky and very soft. You know, even the drums are there, but they're not like knocking, you know? So yeah, that's definitely what I was going for. On this one, you know, Tony's an amazing singer, you know, no autotune or nothing. It's like the real deal. And I wanted to go for something like that. I did have a couple of production things that I like to add sometimes. So like in the chorus, there's this wavy white noise sort of thing that goes in and out that I added in terms of, you know, I guess stepping into the production scene a little bit. I do those things sometimes. I'm not, you know, producing records, but, you know, I'm definitely, if I see that I can improve it somehow,
you do what it takes to make it great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how did you get that vocal sound?
I always use the 1176 on my vocals, but the amount and, you know, the quickness of the interaction of the compression stage changes. For rap stuff, I do intense compression. I usually do 12:1. You can actually see all my settings. I've done a documentary of a song that I mixed for Pitbull, and you can see the exact thing, like I show everything. For rap stuff, I go pretty intense. For R&B stuff like that, I'm sure I've used it, but I'm also sure that I haven't used it as much as I would with rap. For singing stuff, I like to be a little more softer, so LA2A's kind of stuff, or Tube Tech, you know, CL1B kind of stuff. So it's like soft, but it's always there.
And these always hardware or using software?
This one was software.
Right, so it's a software CL1B.
Yes, I've done like a maybe 3-hour shootout with all the 1176s that I had in the computer and mine. And I was like, I mean, yes, mine is still better, but is that really much better? Or, you know, that 10% better that the real unit offers still comes with all the problems with powering, plugging in and out, double conversion, bring it with me if I gotta go to a, you know what I mean?
Recallability.
All of that. Would I like to work on the biggest console ever, every day? Yes. Would I like to work on tape every day? Yes. Is that really realistic? No, it's not. So, yeah. But yeah, so 1176 for sure. I always like to brighten my vocals with the tube-like EQs. So all the high, you know, the sweetness, the airiness, whatever.
Well, I love the vocal tone on that. It feels silky, smooth, all of those things. It has a presence without feeling like there's a lot of high end in there.
Right.
Which I'm also, my question would be, I feel like mixing over the last 10 or 15 years has moved massively towards that. I feel if you listen to mixes of the late 90s, very early 2000s, they were a lot brighter and a lot more aggressive because people were listening on speakers 99% of the time. Now, when I go back, especially in rock, when I go back and I listen on my laptop speakers or things that people do, computer speakers, earbuds, they sound awful because you hear pss, 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 going everywhere. Whether it's essing on vocals or cymbals going or high end on guitars, it doesn't translate. And one of the things I've been seeing and hearing, I should say, over the last 10 or 15 years is a really, really super controlled high end.
Absolutely.
So that we can listen at low volumes, we can listen on, you know, iPhones, Androids, earbuds. It's starting to translate. And now the challenge is, and I'm sure you understand where I'm going, the challenge is how do you still keep it exciting? Because high end is what we associate with excitement.
That's very true. Even the records that I grew up listening to, like for me, the Holy Grail was Dr. Dre 2001. That was like really the Holy Grail. In fact, whenever I'm going to meet him, I'm probably going to have a, you know, Wayne's World moment, like, not worth it, you know?
Yeah.
I'm going to have one of those. Well, records were a lot quieter, number one, and then a lot more dynamics, no low end. Like, you know, in the 90s, there were not, I shouldn't say that because that's generalizing, but
sure,
you know, there's definitely not as much sub that a Skrillex record has now, you know, for sure. So it was a very different game. But, you know, also a lot of distortion, good and bad distortion, that is. And also specifically in the urban sound, a lot of new elements were introduced that back then were just not there, besides the obvious auto-tunes and stuff like that. But even like distorting the vocals or, you know, having all these synths, that was not a thing, you know, 10 years ago at all. You know, it was like all samples for hip hop. I'm talking. Not only the high end, I feel like is very controlled today. I know that in my mixes, everything is uber under the microscope when I work on it. It's not just let me make it brighter. It's like it needs to be brighter, yes, but it needs to be controlled. So, for example, de-essing is absolutely a must for all of my vocals because I want them bright and high up on the Twitter, but then the S's are out of control. If that needs to be addressed.
But I'm sure you're finding you're manually drawing them out as well.
Rarely.
Oh, really?
Rarely.
Oh, that's good. So you've managed.
I de-ess everything heavily, but you don't really hear it because then I brighten it up a lot. What I do manually is the breaths.
Well, I know a lot of guys when doing like super pop stuff will time breaths.
Yeah, I mean, it is part of the composition, but I just feel like they shouldn't be as important as, the next syllable. But it's funny because I do have a client that actually asked me to turn them back up. And I was like, that's strange. But, if it's part of the rhythm, I get it.
We were just talking about one of the Muse records that Rich Costey did, where the breaths are like, it's really super loud, but it adds to the intensity of the vocal.
Yeah.
So, I suppose horses for courses, as we like to say, whatever works best.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong. You're right.
We have time for something else. Let's have a listen to something else. What would you recommend?
Yeah, this guy. The reason why I want to play this one is because pay attention to the launch of the last chorus, and that is because we were talking about how sometimes production is a little blurred into the mixing, not all the time. But I've done something to that's interesting. This is Kevin Gates and Kirko Bangz.
That's the man in my respect, original Gandad. In a foreign whip with a V12, still to me a top shot. Yeah, when the mafia pull up on side and yell it down the window, we got it. Came up from nothing, they said I'd be nothing, and now they surprised that we fine. When they say that they need you, no matter what they won't leave you. Through the ups and downs, let it turn around, go broke and watch how they treat you. This is ridiculous, people pretend to get mad and offended because I won't give them shit. I do not give a shit, calling me heartless, my struggle disgusting, my hustle retarded. BWA, we ain't losing, maybe.
I got everything on me, these bitches waiting on me, these niggas hating on me. But you don't know the shit that I've been through, you don't know the struggle I lived through. I got everything, but I still do it right now. Gotta hustle hard every day, I'm tryna make a way right now. I can't put it off another day, I can't fade away right now. You don't know the shit that I've been through, you don't know the struggle I lived through. Got everything, but I still do it right now.
Amazing producer Jay Oliver produced this record, and sometimes, especially with those that I know that like that kind of stuff, I try to push it a little too far. Every time I deliver my first mix to my client, it's always as bombastic as I can see it, also in the production terms. So that drop or that launch or whatever, it's the chorus, is a little, it's big, So like if the producer hears it and it's like, oh, I didn't put that there, what the hell is that? So sometimes it's a little too much, But I like to push the boundaries, and especially with those that I know that are okay with that. And I've mixed 1 million records for Jay, and he's amazing. So I was like, let me try to do that. I did, and he was like, I love it, let's just put it on the last chorus though, rather than on each chorus, right? Which does make sense. He wants to have his space, and then maybe at the last one, we give him a little special something. So in that case, it kind of like, that intervention is a little more of a production thing rather than a mixing thing per se. But I was like, if it helps the record and if the producer likes it.
I think it goes back, I can hear, we got the sub, that 808 going on is massive.
Huge, yeah.
And then you've shelved your kick a little higher so that...
Yeah.
But it definitely feels more kickish than the first track, which is kind of like that dot, dot, dot,
Yeah,
dot.
that's right.
This has a very glued together feel. I love the synth that goes on in the chorus. It sounds almost like haunting and ghostly.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you've got some reverbs or delays that you put on that, or if they weren't printed on it.
Yeah, I believe it was printed on it. I think it was part of the instrument itself. In fact, I always ask my producers to send me everything with the treatment that they had. So if it's a Logic thing, then I will probably not even see the plugins because I just get the waves.
Sure.
If it's Pro Tools, of course, I can see them. But I like to start where they stopped, so I don't have to reconstruct everything that they're okay with. Right. So I always tell them, if you for sure want me to change something, then just give it to me dry. If you are married with the idea and you like it, then we'll just keep rocking with it. I just received some files the other day for a new EP that I'm getting ready to mix, and they just sent me 2 folders for each song, dry and wet. So now I have everything.
What do you prefer? You prefer to hear what they've got?
I studied their rough mix, so it's got everything in it. So I usually build my sessions off of the wet files, and then if something needs to be addressed differently, then I go to the dry ones. And I suspect that I'm gonna do that with a lot of lead vocals because there's a lot of reverbs and effects and stuff. And that's, that may be a little too tight for me if I want to do compression or whatever, then, I've got all that reverb in the way,
Right. Makes sense.
And also tuning, I also asked them to give me everything tuned already. Unless it's, the T-Pain effect auto-tune where it's like just jacked up,
Makes sense. I mean, I'm getting mastering engineers, they always want to hear what the label or the client's heard.
Yes.
It's like, don't just send me which is important, you want to send your mastering engineer something that's not smashed so they can do some work to it. But if the only thing the artist and the clients have heard is with tons of stuff on a master bus, then the master engineer has to have that as well.
Yeah, I actually do print all of my mixes at as loud as they can before clipping with no plugins. So it's just basically the naked mix. But then I also deliver to both my clients and my mastering engineer a 7 dBs louder version of that same mix. So I literally, my entire mastering chain is L2 at -7, that's it. No EQ, no nothing, it's just basically that. 7 dBs, which is enough to make the mix loud enough to semi-compete with everything else so that when they listen to it in the car, if they're used to blast it at 12, say whatever, they can put it at 14, it's almost there,
Sure.
But I expect my mastering engineer to go over 7 dBs. So it's, maybe like 8 or something. I don't know. It's not it depends on a song by song case, of course.
Sure.
But, I feel like that's a good medium to where my clients have enough to play with, but also my mastering engineer has enough to play with. And
All right, we have one more I see here.
Cool.
Let's
do
listen
it.
to that.
Angina, very good R&B song. Check it out.
Didn't take you very long. A smile and a simple love song. Now we're tangled in two. Got me acting like a fool for you. Now I'm just waiting for your call to hear you say those words come over. And I hate to admit I run to you instantly. Oh, you got me up and down, going anywhere you want me to be. Oh, you got me up and down and around my head. I know I'm not your only one.
Bow tie.
Yeah, that's your bow tie music.
Bow tie music, for sure.
Yeah, beautiful voice.
Yeah.
Again, just a little tiny bit brighter and more aggressive than the other R&B one, vocal-wise. I like it. I think it gives her a little bit more presence, just to have that tiny bit more. How did you achieve that?
My idea here is the music is all live. And I wanted her to sit on top and be able to project and to be identifiable amongst all of that other stuff. Also, in the chorus, there's these other pitched up vocals. It's still her. So, I wanted to make sure that I would differentiate everything. And I also wanted to go for that little tape thing, the distortion, the harmonic pleasure distortion kind of thing. So that's what I did with that.
What were you using to get that little grit on her vocal then?
I believe that on that one, I used the parallel treatment for the vocal. So like we have the, 85, maybe 90% of the vocal that you hear is actually her main track where it's all nice and pretty. But then parallel to that, I use the tape saturation plugin with no, nothing under say 2000 hertz or something. So it was basically just the high end. Sometimes I like to do that trick too with vocoders and stuff like that and just blend it where you don't really hear it, but you hear something is there. In this case, I kept it mono, so it's like together. So there's no way for you to really pick and distinguish which track is which. So that's what's happening on this one.
It's great. I mean, that subtlety I could hear and I appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Also, in the chorus, that hi-hat was coming in, and I'm moving it left to right, slow, not all the way through, but every now and again. And that was like persistent. It was right there with the vocal, you know. So I wanted to make sure that she was above it. Also, another thing that typically on R&B and pop records, the chorus has a lot more voices than the verses. Not on this one. This is one track all the way through. So I wanted to make sure that I would have that step up on the chorus. The producer, Kenny Dub, which I have mixed a million records for, him knows what to give me in terms of, not overdo it. And anytime he gives me stuff, I know I'm going to work with what I have and make it big. As opposed to other engineers, other producers that give me maybe 150 tracks. And now out of that, I got to mute like half of those because there's no space for everything. So it's like I look at those mixes as subtractive, I guess, and these as additive, meaning I make everything that's there bigger. But ultimately, the voice is the queen of the composition of the song.
You know what's interesting about this, because thanks for choosing these, because they have similarities but differences. Vocal tone's been a big one. The other big differentiator for me, obviously, this has still got that higher kick with the lower sub, etc., going on. But because the kick part feels so like somebody's playing it from an MPC,
yes,
whether it's played in, pasted in, but it feels like an old hip hop record where, I have a friend that worked on It Takes a Nation of Millions, and he told me that everything was live played to tape.
Right.
So it'd be like, so there was no like copy and paste because it's the 80s.
Right.
There was only so much you could do. And this feels like that. It feels like somebody is live playing, triggering the kick. So it feels a little bit more like it's on top. But I like that because that makes me think that there is somebody like in a room like triggering it. And rather than the urban kind of kick on the first song, it's right in there.
Right.
And it feels really connected. This actually feels slightly disconnected, but in a good way.
Oftentimes when the drums are programmed to the click, like quantized perfectly, they're actually kind of boring. So I like to shuffle things around, move things around.
Oh, interesting.
I like to move the hi-hat later, maybe the claps. I often do that. And if that still doesn't work, I even go to the extent of automating these movements so that I'm giving it I shouldn't call it a live feel because it's not live, but a more human thing,
right.
Unless it's requested to be like straight on, like those super fast hi-hats. Those I'm not moving. But I always like to, spice it up a little bit to make it a little more, and these are things that most of the times are not even heard, but they are felt more than anything.
They're totally felt. I hear it. If I take a drum track that's, live drum track that's 99%, played tight as a great drummer would do, and then straighten it up, and just destroy everything about it. And it's subtle little movements.
Yeah.
But I think it's the repetitive nature of something always being consistent can get
absolutely
really exhausting.
A few years back, I did a record with this band in Baltimore where we decided not to use computers. So we went to tape, old school way. Oftentimes when I say that, people are like, well, how did you do it? I'm like, tape, like how they did it for years.
Those things over there. Yes.
Yeah, right? And I know you're a fan of tape, so that was fun. And one of the things that we decided to do was to not use clicks, not use playlists, no editing, no nothing. It was basically like a live show at the studio with the singer next to the band. They were all in the same room at the same time. It was fantastic. It felt like kind of like when back in the day I was producing records with computers that were like this big with no power capability, no RAM, no nothing. And I had to squeeze everything into the 24 tracks or else that was it because that's all I had. And it was great to, that limitation often gives...
That's the thing.
Right?
That's the biggest thing. I mean, everything we're talking about with like Waves and UADs and Slate plugins, all of these companies making Mac DSP making these plugins that are so close enough that you can taste it to real analog simulations or emulations.
Yeah.
The one difference about thinking like a tape or a limited amount of tracks is going more for performance rather than going for fixing it.
Yeah.
That I think is the part of the discussion that I wish we'd have more.
Right.
Because it's not a tape versus analog versus digital anymore. That's gone. There is no more. Digital won. It won, okay? Tape is hundreds of dollars. I love my tape machine. I haven't turned it on in the longest time.
Yeah.
But if I had a band that came in that specifically not just wanted the sound, because I can emulate the sound.
Right.
I really can. And most of it, the sound of tape is not just the tape, as you know, it was the fact that we would go into a room where there'd be a big Neve or an API and tons of Pultecs and loads of tubes and most importantly, transformers that gave it this weight. I mean, you just played me a vocal that was beautiful, that had that saturation on the vocal, and you didn't use tape. Thank you for choosing those 5 songs. They have a lot of similarities. It was actually quite important to me that there be a story between them, but because of the subtleties in the vocal settings, the way you're treating the low end, for me, actually, the difference between the first and the last song was a big deal, because sometimes I hate the disconnection between urban stuff put into like rock and R&B. Sometimes it just feels, and the first track you played, it was so beautifully blended. And then the last track, it was almost sounded so deliberate to have that kick sit on top, but it made it feel young and youthful and energetic. So it just goes to prove there's no one way to do anything.
There isn't.
And it's not about boosting and cutting frequencies. It's about, as you were saying, you listen to the rough mix, you work with a lot of the same people, so you have good relationships with your clients, so you can call them up and go, what was your intention?
That's one of the decisions that really made me create a YouTube channel and do these documentaries that I have out, because they're like showing that every session, every studio, every situation is different. You know, yeah, there are some things that are always there, but everything is different, which is, you know, the cool thing about our industry. You know, working in music, you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. You know.
Well, fantastic. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you for having me, Warren. Absolutely.
We'll post links to the songs, either Spotify, hopefully they're all on Spotify, or iTunes or SoundCloud or whatever. There'll be links so you can listen. So leave comments and questions below.
problem.
And thank you, SAE, for letting us use this room to have this wonderful talk. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing.